You were from the town that I love best. Talk Memphis, I wish you would. Talk Memphis.
Idea of the market in which you're looking at. So today's show, we're going to talk about your price, my terms, or your terms, my price with Dan Butler. Dan, how are you? I'm doing pretty good. I am. Are you with us?
I think so.
There you go.
There I am.
Oh, he's in there.
We get a text from Randall saying we're not on there.
Did we?
No, I'm just saying last week.
Yeah, last week we did for sure.
How was the feedback last week after the show with Wendy? And
it was really good. I always, every time she's on, I always get a call or two or an email.
Yeah.
How do I get in touch with her? What kind of information else? What other information does she give you? But I know we've used her and her services for almost 2 years now through the show. You might have even been using her longer, but she's starting to. I know she's doing some research on Jackson, Tennessee for us to see
the trends
and what's going on up there. Mm-hmm.
Well, what I loved was that her data and what it showed was the same thing that we're reading about from the economists from a nationwide perspective.
That's what I love about it.
And then how it applies to Memphis. Market prices are going to stay, relatively flat this year.
Yep.
Maybe a slight increase in certain zip codes, but we're not going to see some huge swing this year because, we're kind of at the top of the market, what people are willing to pay. And,
I thought that at the end of last year. I thought, hey, prices have been climbing for 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw a little bit of a slowdown. And to me, that was almost like a plateau, a flattening out. And now when the beginning of the year comes back, we start hitting and business is going again. But prices aren't moving up. I've 7 or 8 listings in the last week, and all of them have been fair. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any sellers coming to me going, I want this astronomical number.
Mm-hmm.
They're all kind of right in line with what the market is. So
what is your biggest, before we jump on the topic, what's your biggest need right now? What are people looking for? I mean, are you still seeing across every, I sent you a guy that wanted 6 or 7, super, super low end.
I'm getting more coming out of the woodwork that want those $20,000 properties.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it is. They're coming out of the woodwork that want them. And you know what? Like I've always said, if you have the business model set up and all the tools and your team members ready, then you can those are good rentals.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you just got to be able to be prepared for what, a little higher turnover, probably some more maintenance than what you want.
Slower collections
and things like that. But at the end of the year, they usually pencil really well. So it's just a matter of, do you have the bandwidth and the time and the energy and the effort to fool with it?
Well, one thing I heard in the last week is just how much activity is starting to happen in North Haven.
Really?
You know how I've been on Debbie Downer on that one, and I mean, there's people buying it right now. I mean,
because they're getting them for $5,000 and $10,000,
right? And fixing them up, and we just need some activity up there, though. That's my big thing. It's just some retail or some manufacturing or some kind of jobs to help create some stability to that area, but. People are going in and going to make it happen. So we'll see I'll be the outcome on that one.
Interested to see how people...
Because those are solid houses. I mean, we've owned a bunch over the years. 3.2s, 3.1s.
So it's the tenant base that's been the
tough,
biggest issue.
Right. The houses are solid. I mean, they're good construction, brick homes. So, I mean, the house itself hasn't been an issue. It's been people messing with the house. It's been my issue. Got to keep that thing tight and secure. So...
Yeah, and I sent you another Fraser one this week, and you were like, "I love Fraser, not that
far west." Yeah, that was. I mean,
it looked good. The house looked great. To your point, just right then, when I saw that house, the first thing I thought of was the picture. I was like, "Man, this is in great shape."
Yeah,
for $25,000.
I just got off. I was late walking in. A client of ours from Israel, and she said she's putting a house on a contract with Cordova, and then she probably wanted us to sell it. And I said, "Well, good for you, thank goodness," because I mean, when she first came in. She's buying some lower end stuff, and
now she's finally got
getting some Cordova stuff, and that just makes it easier on us. I think
and her,
and the feeling,
especially if you're in Israel.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, that's the perfect person that does not need a $25,000 house.
Well, what was interesting about that was that she's, and I just didn't realize this kind of stuff's still going on. Like, again, go back to about the team. We talked about a lot about that last couple of months. Like, her manager's kind of just vanished.
Mm-hmm.
She's not getting her money. And so,
she's 5,000 miles away.
5,000 miles away. She's not going to get on a plane and, for 2 houses, so going to help her on that. But I mean, it's just interesting. Just reiterates what we keep talking about over and over about your team has got to be solid. Whoever you pick, vet them, make sure,
That's a show we're going to do here in the next couple of weeks is the Build Your Team again. We're starting to take, for those of you who've been listening for a long time, we're going to begin to take some of the older topics that we did a year ago or even 2 years ago and regurgitate that information and update it and make any changes to the topic. So you guys can stay tuned for that for the weeks to come. But today it is your price, my terms, your terms, my price. Dan, I've heard you say this a million times. And you've used it in your own personal negotiations on how. So dive into that real quick. Tell me what does your price, my terms, your terms, my price mean?
Well, as I went over this topic this morning, I realized kind of the segment 1 and 2 is kind of really the same thing. One of my mentors taught me the term "your price, my terms, your terms, my price." You're like, what does that mean? And at the essence of it is, people want choices. And you got to figure out where the pain point is. You know what I mean? So in this case, mentor was telling me that. I'm at a church retreat and hear a guy talking about, coaching your kids, and you're fighting with them about putting that coat on. And it's like, man, just change it. Say, hey, would you like to carry that coat with you or put your coat on? Well, then you're putting the power back into your child. He's making that ultimate call. He feels like he's won because you're not making him put that jacket on. And if he's cold, he's going to put it on. You know what I mean? So you put that power back into him and you're okay with either choice because he's not going to die because he got a coat with him. No. When he starts shivering and his teeth are chattering, he's going to put that coat on. So apply that to your price, my terms, your terms, my price. You're just trying to, hey, this will work for me. Yeah. And you're putting it back into the seller's hands of, hey, I'm okay with any of these. Which one do you want? You know what I mean?
It's a really good negotiating, and I don't want to say tactic because it's not you're not trying to pull something over on somebody.
No, it's trying to make a win-win. That's the difference.
Yeah, it's a good way to make both sides feel like they've won. And I've always said this in a deal that you make with anybody. I don't care if it's for a house or if it's to cut somebody's yard. If both parties feel like, okay, let's go. I feel like that's a good deal. So when I'm negotiating between a seller and a buyer, if my seller's just a little upset, okay, not really, and the buyer's like, man, okay, but I feel like I've gotten
pushed both limits.
I feel like I've gotten both. The best I could out of both sides. Yeah, trying to bring them together. So, your price, my terms. Give us some examples. Tell me how it works and what you mean. Specifically when you talk about this.
So basically, you're trying to look at the deal. So somebody's presented. Say you bring me a deal. Yep. And I look at it, and it's $40,000. The guy wants $40,000, and it's a $700 rental. Yep. Well, then you just start, hopefully everybody's got a spreadsheet or some calculator. I know Bigger Pockets has a,
I'm seeing that way more often.
I know. People keep posting.
That to
me. I created my own years ago. A buddy of mine, Hunter, back in Greenville, had a simple formula, and I kind of expanded it for my own personal use. And you just start plugging away at numbers. But let me back up. I mean, part of this, and I talked to somebody a couple of weeks ago, and back up and say, you got to understand where your financing is coming from. This doesn't work unless you understand, do you have bank financing? Do you have,
you got to be ahead
line of credit? You can't just go into the deal, your price, my terms, your terms, my price doesn't work unless you can back up any of the choices that you presented. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you can't. Yes, yeah.
You can't go in it like guns a-blazing.
You got to have anything secured.
You got to be prepared. Have you talked to your community bank and they're willing to do an 80-20 loan where you put 20% down? Or have you talked to the Fannie Mae type guys that can do those long-term mortgages and they can do a line of credit and turn it into a Fannie Mae? And you got to talk through and think through those situations
before you even start negotiating.
Yep. Hard money, same thing. If you used hard money, what is he willing or she willing to do? How would that loan work? They want any money? Do you want any skin in the game? Or if you don't put skin in the game, is the interest rate different? Which then plays into your calculations, right?
That's right.
So it's a process to get to your price, my terms, your terms, my price. You can't just, go in there and just willy-nilly throw in some numbers. You got to really, you know, I try to go with 2 or 3 choices, you know, is what I usually try to do. With each of them, basically the math comes out the same.
It's just how do you get there?
Yeah, it's how you get there. So, you know, example that you know, I remember doing it. I think it was on Byron or Durban or somewhere in Berkeley.
Yeah.
You know, I think it was like, hey, I'll do 35,000 close with cash in 2 weeks. Well, I really didn't want to use my line. You know, I try to save the line for the deals that I can't get all my choices lined up like I want.
That's right.
And so I offered lower, you know, and then maybe 40,000, you know, if they'll, you know, if they'll finance the 20% and let the bank finance 80. And then another choice was, hey, I'll pay you 45,000 if you do 100% financing for, say, 3 years on a 15-year amortization, you know? And so
you're just giving options.
You're just giving options. They come in, they look at it, and they're like, you know, and then it turns into a little bit of negotiation. You know, you got to have some wiggle room in each one of those numbers because you know they're going to not just settle on the 35 or the 40 or the 45 likely.
Yeah.
But, and a lot of times I'll just hand them my spreadsheet. You know, I'll just say, here's the 3, and I'll let them just have my spreadsheet and say, you can play with the numbers and see that I got to have this cash flow and this, you know, to cover my note or whatever the payment's going to be, either you owner financing it or the bank or whatever.
What do you typically like? Is there one of the process or one of the options that you go with that a seller typically chooses? Is there something, in other words, like I'm assuming if you give somebody 2 or 3 options, no matter the house, those options are pretty similar. You know what I mean? Like the actual numbers might change, but the structure and the base of those 3 offers is probably very similar.
Right.
Is there one that sellers typically tend to lean on? I mean, because I would think my first, you know, if I were to be asked that question, I would think they'd take the higher price no matter what. I would think.
You would think,
but they might not care about. They want maybe a higher rate. They want that higher, you know, percentage return on the money. So I'm not sure. Is there one of those options that people choose over the other?
It's all going to be situational.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think. You know, I had a class, wholesale class with Rico this weekend. I went to the University of Memphis and talked to those guys, and they're like, "What do you think about the recession and the deal flow?" And I'm like, "I said, are people still dying? Are people still divorcing?
Yeah.
Are people still getting hurt? Are people still going bankrupt? You know what I mean? Like, so
yeah."
And I'm saying all that to kind of relate to, like, there's always going to be deals, number one.
Yeah.
And because of that, those type of situations, a divorce is going to probably work differently than just got hurt, you know, disabled, can't work like they used to,
right.
Or your spouse died or your mom died. Does that make sense? Like every one of those is going to be, or one of them, I'm just sick of this, and I can't stand them. I'm too emotionally attached to what goes on in these houses, and I can't, you know, from 2,000 miles away, I can't do it.
Yeah.
So I mean, every one of those is going to lead you down to a path that's going to be different. Does that make sense?
I'm getting some retirement too.
Retirement, yeah.
People that just say, "Hey, look, I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm done."
I mean, I got an email Sunday, a guy that we work with up, you know, near Jackson, and so now deals are starting to flow because of relationships up there. And he's like, "Man, my wife tired of dealing with this house. The tenant's been there 3 years. You know, moved out. Do you want it?" And so you know, my first question is, "Can you owner finance?"
Yeah.
You know,
what'd he say?
He's like, "Short term, yes."
So that's great.
So your price, my terms, I mean, I don't know what short term means. I got to like flesh that out. My short term,
3 years.
His 30 days, and mine's 3 years or more. You know, and so for the listeners to understand what kind of on the owner finance piece of why the price and terms is a big deal. Like if you put something on a 15-year note with owner finance, okay, you in 3 years you can pay down enough of that price of the equity and turn around and refinance it with a local bank that they will finance 100% because of the loan to just you're got to make an assumption that the appraisal will stay. If it's $40,000 today, 3 years it's $40,000. So they're going to loan you at 32.
That's right. So if you can pay it down to 32.
If you pay it down to close to 32, you can get 100% financing out of this over a 3-year period. Does that make sense?
Yep.
That's why this is so powerful and so why it's so important to think that way. Versus just going in there and say, I got to put 20% down.
Or not just the one deal. I try to encourage investors, too, to think about the business. The whole thing. Not 123 Main Street, but XYZ LLC, the whole business, and think about, okay, I'm going to keep this for this long. I can refi it and go in long term with it. And we're talking about your price, my terms, your terms, my price. We talked about how it works, how you usually use that, and is there any kind of seller that works for better than others? Is there, like I could see owner financing where you've got the ability to kind of really negotiate because the terms are solely based with that seller, right? They come up with the rate they want and the term, and to me that gives you a window of opportunity to say, okay, I'll take that higher rate and I'll take that shorter term, but I want to pay a lower price.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I think with, especially owner finance type situations, I think it's somebody that's owned it for a long time, towards retirement or retired, or, or started young and just, they don't want the tax hit by selling the capital gains for selling it, that year.
Yep.
So there's different ways, that's where I see it work the best.
Yeah.
Or where it's just a distressed situation and there really isn't no other choice. You know what I mean? Like, with that one we dealt with in Brownsville where the family, the husband passed away and left 2 kids that are in Mississippi State and a wife that, didn't know anything about the businesses per se.
Yeah.
And, they got to do something, and so, in that situation, the owner, this is where property management kind of comes into play, like no leases, barely in the phone numbers, barely into the names, because he just drove around and picked up the rent.
And they knew him.
And so that, that's a tough situation.
I think that's like we see too much of that.
It's a lot. I mean, you would think that as technology and social media and all that stuff, that's still a prevalent way to do business. It's a big, you know what I mean? Like there's just
go by and say hello and collect the check.
One of our clients now that he just loves to go pick up his rent, and it's like, man, you can't do that. I mean, you're just messing up the system for tracking, for legal, to eviction. You know what I mean? Like,
are these guys the ones that have 5 houses, or they got 50?
More than 5 usually.
Yeah.
But that's something they just. I mean, it was a mind shift for me, back, years ago for 10 years.
Oh, we've talked about this.
Yeah, I was stubborn for 10 years, plus just going every Saturday, every Sunday, picking up rent. And, once we made the decision not to do it, my rent's better. My collections are better now than when I went and picked it up $100 at a time.
It's dawning on me right now that, I mean, not right now, but it's something that's popping in my head right now that's the importance of property management.
Yeah.
When we're talking about this.
Sure.
I mean, we're sitting here talking about how in the world are you collecting rent? Why in the world are you going around doing that? But we know that there's property management that's in place that can help you do that, right? That's why I think it's important for investors to listen to shows like this, or go into Bigger Pockets, or, talk to other people that are professionals in this that are doing it what we would consider the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And driving around and picking up rent is not one of them.
No, I mean, that's just one example. So I think that's, but I mean, I think it'll play into our next segment after we talk about choices. But I mean, I think the fact that, the people that I talk to, they're just scared to let it go. They're scared
that somebody.
They're thinking about the short term, how am I going to make the mortgages, how am I going to make the notes, because they made all these deals, or people are going to pay partial payments and just barely keep me up. And my point is, they're going to keep paying partial payments for as long as they're in that house. As long as you allow them, unless you make a big shift, and I did that several years ago. And remember, I told you I lost one tenant out of, 100-something tenants. And the one that replaced that tenant back in 2012 is still there. It's now 2019. And I've never met her. And she pays every month on time. You know what I mean? And we take care of the house.
I've got a couple of those. Bless those people. Your price, my terms. Your terms, my price. Give me, before we went on break, we had an example. Give me another example of that. And what reason why I asked that is I feel like we can tell you, we can say the phrase, your price, my terms, your terms, my price 100 times. But until we give the listeners and some of our investors some, circumstances and some live situations, then I think it's a little bit harder to understand. So give me another example if you've got one.
Sure, I got several. I mean, I could talk about this for days, as
Right.
you know. I mean, I think the very first one, I'll just talk real quickly. The one that kind of was a light bulb moment for me was a mentor telling me about his friend buying a house on Normandy, which is East Memphis, 38117.
Yep.
And, you know, the person wanted, say, back then it was, call it $150,000, which was 20 years ago was a lot of money for an East Memphis house.
It's a lot of money now
Still, yeah, exactly.
for some houses over there.
For some. But he didn't want to get full price. But then he had the light bulb moment. It's like, okay, well, I'll give you full price, but it's 0% interest.
Right.
It's 0. So if you think about it, people are like, well, I can't, I mean, it's only worth 125, or I don't want to pay more than 125. Well, say 150, I don't know what the math is, say, but you paid 150, you know, within a year or two, I'd have to do the math. I didn't do it before the show, but you are at the 125 and you're accelerating so fast because every payment is principal.
That's right.
You know, so if you put that on a 15-year note, 150,000, that's 10,000 a year, right? That's all principal. Whereas on the flip side, if you had a 5% interest, maybe 4,000, that's going to be, you know, starting out, maybe 3,000, but this is 10.
See, this is great.
You know, so that's why the interest rate and all that stuff makes a big difference, you know. So that's one.
Mm-hmm.
Let me give you another one.
Yeah, come on with it.
All right.
That to me, I like that one specifically because if you think about it, like you said, if you have 0 interest and you pay that down, you're basically just paying your interest up front. I mean,
that's right.
You know what I mean? Like if you can put
By paying a premium on the house.
By paying a premium on the house, you're basically just saying, hey, I'm going to pay for this interest for you up front. Knock it all out, and then for the rest of life, you're killing that principal and knocking that principal down. Yeah, I mean, and maybe the example is it's not $25,000 every time, but it could be like 10 or 12 higher than what you normally want to pay.
Mm-hmm.
Pay that down for 12 months, 18 months, and then you can kind of almost say, okay, now I'm starting to pay this off in my ownership of it. 18 months down the road. Yeah, I like it. Let's have another example.
So, you know, one of the ones, the big one during the recession that I loved was a bank, you know, had a 10-house package up in Raleigh. And, you know, they were in it for 80 something. They, as a bank board, decided they didn't want to go below, you know, 55,000 or something like that. Mm-hmm. They didn't want to write off more than 30,000 a house. I mean, it was already going to be a big loss.
Yep.
You know, and the problem for us was the rents had gone down. You know, it was say 1,000, but because in that particular area, the flood of just unfinished house, it was just a different dynamic in that it was a newer subdivision. Mm-hmm. So we couldn't make the numbers work because they weren't $1,000 anymore. They were less than that. So, you know, I did the spreadsheet and worked on it for a while, and I was like, you know, I was coming up at like 35,000, knowing I had to put some money in it and all that stuff. And he was at 55. Yeah. And so he's like, man, I don't know. And I was like, well, here's my spreadsheet. And I literally sent it to him on Excel. And about 2 days later, he called me and I said, hey, I'm about to send you the spreadsheet. Let's talk through this. And so what he had done was, you know, put it at, you know, 55,000, but at like 2.5% interest, something like that.
Really low.
Something really low that they could, you know, they weren't losing money on the interest, but they weren't making money. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the payment was similar to what we needed, but 3/4 of it, because it's 2.5% interest, was going to principal. So within a year, 18 months, I think we were at that 35,000, you know, maybe 2 years. But after that, it just kept knocking it really, really fast, going down below 35. So the payment was good. We were good because the payment was the same, but the principal was getting knocked off so quickly that, you know, and most people have been like, well, why? I'm not paying 55. Does that make sense? They get caught up in that. I mean, that's where I, you know, one of my lessons I'm trying to probably convey in this show is like, don't get caught up so much in the sales price. I mean, you don't want to pay, you know, it was worth 55. I mean, yeah, I could turn around and have sold it for 55. Now if he'd asked for 80, there's no way I was going to do that, you know? Yeah. But let's don't be so short-sighted, you know, and
it's teaching you to think of all the angles.
Yes.
Of every angle, not just the sales price, but I mean, I always like, when I'm negotiating, I always like to take myself out of it and put myself on the other side of the table. Like, okay, this is my house at this price. It's in this condition. You know, what would I be looking for, and try to give them what they're shooting for. But I think that's a key thing that you just said is don't get focused on one specific part of the negotiating.
Box, yeah.
Like the price or the rate or the you know, term or the year terms.
Yeah, some people just the rate's 5.5% right now. That's all they can think.
And they're losing their mind over that.
No, it's not. That's just what a bank is asking you if you're going to borrow it from them.
That's right.
That's all that is.
That's a great point. The rate is not.
The rate is what, you know. We're going to borrow some money to buy some condos, and you know, just depending on what the market's doing, the lady that we borrow from, you know, she might be fine at 4% 1 year, but like now she wants 6.5 because the market's in a different place. Interest rates are going up, and she says they're looking as somebody that you're borrowing from or you're trying to buy from. They're looking at what their alternative is with that money.
That's right.
So, like, again, why the owner finance thing is so cool in these situations a lot of times is that 6%, like, you buy something for $100,000. Let's give an example, and you're going to offer them 6%. That's $6,000 a year in interest, just interest only, no principal. Well, what are they going to put that $100,000? They're going, if they're 75 years old, 80 years old, are they going to put it in an aggressive stock market, try to get 20?
No way.
No, they're probably going to put it in an annuity or money market, and you're going to get 2-3%. So let's call it 2.5. That's $2,500 versus you're offering them something to get $6,000. You've more than doubled what they're going to get off that 100, which is several $100s a month of cash flow. They can go hang out and play bridge and eat dinner with their friends or whatever that is. Piccadilly, yeah. Bridge is top of mind. This lady at office went to a bridge cruise last week.
Oh, that's great.
I was like, what?
A real killer time.
4 days of bridge on a cruise ship. So that's why that's top of my mind. But
pudding and Jello and stuff.
I had my very first type of price your terms situation just came up this past month. So we've been trying to buy these condos from a guy, friend of ours, and we were about $10,000 off. So kind of go back and forth and worked on it, but he came up with the idea, and it was his idea. It wasn't even my idea. The whole price terms, it was his terms.
This is good.
Like he's like, well, man, you got that maintenance company, and I've been trying to dabble, go into getting full-time management. He's one of the guys that still picks up the rent, does a lot of stuff himself, but he can't. He's pushing himself to get over that mental hurdle. And one of those ideas, he's like, "Hey, will you give me $6,000 worth of work if I knock $5,000 off the price?"
Yeah,
I was like, okay. So I get $5,000 discount on the price of the package, and I got to give him over the next year $6,000 worth of HVAC and plumbing work.
Those two specific.
Or anything, but I mean, that's probably where it'll land. Yeah. And I was like, sure. Because I mean, I'll end up, somewhere in that $5,000 spend anyway, cost. So it's a wash for me. It allows him to get services that now he can just try us out, not have to worry about that expense for the year.
That's a great idea.
Isn't it crazy? That's the first time I love bartering. I love the concept of bartering, and that's bartering at its finest, right? Just, it's a win-win for all of us, because he gets to try us out, maybe try to tiptoe out of, him doing all the property management, see what our services are like.
You get the deal done.
I get the deal done. I get it for cheaper because of I'm worried about my monthly cash flow. That's what I'm concerned about, my note versus the income. And that's why I was pushing hard to get that reduction. Because every $5,000 can make a difference. So
these are great examples, guys. If you're listening to this now, of try to use and apply some of these things as you're negotiating. If you're not going through us or through another agent and you're doing it yourself, try to use some of these things. Apply these to your own business, and see. You never know until you try, right? I mean, like, some of these things might sound outlandish, they might sound a little off the wall, but you don't ever know until you try. So I encourage you to think outside the box a little bit, and it might not even be exactly one of these examples that we're giving you, but it might be, or allow you to start thinking a different way, to where you can come up with something that would apply in your business and what you're trying to negotiate for. So your price, my terms; your terms, my price. I love this topic. We're gonna skip over. By the way, tons of useful information there. When you start talking about negotiating and getting back and forth with sellers and banks and different people, to think outside the box, you never know till you ask, right? I mean, you don't ever, somebody might say, well, how in the world would you ever come up with, why would they ever accept that? Well, you might offer that or one of these scenarios that we spoke about 25 times, and you might get 24 no's, and on the 25th one, it's a great one, and it works for you. So it's just always something to throw out there. So I enjoy those examples.
One thing I'll throw out there is,
listeners do too.
Yeah. One thing I was going to throw out there is just if any of our listeners, want help thinking through a deal, I'm happy to, that's one of the I guess the gifts I've been blessed with that I enjoy. Yeah. Whether it's my deal or somebody else's deal, I just enjoy help trying to figure out how to make it a win-win. Yeah. And that's just fun.
Is it a competition thing for you? Is it like a competitive nature? Say, hey, let's get this deal done.
I love doing deals, so that's probably a little bit of competitive, but it's not like for the money.
I don't mean to win. I just mean like competitive in the sense of pulling, because I am. Mm-hmm. I get in for whatever reason, I'm doing this 17 years, I still get it. But pulling two people together to make a deal it makes me excited. Yes. And I don't have anything to do with the deal. You know what I mean? Like I'm not on the buyer or the seller side. Sure. I'm just helping facilitate this thing. So I know that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, yeah, not. And we talked about that at Rico's class Saturday. Just not in it for the money. Yeah. You're in it to help. Yeah. And so when you're helping that buyer, that seller, that somebody that's trying to get rid of that house wants to retire. Yep. Or somebody's just starting out real estate and just can't figure out, they got this deal in front of them and can't figure out how to make it happen. If we can help them, man, that's awesome. We just help people move forward, and we've been blessed with people mentoring us and helping us, and that's the sign of a true mentor. You're just not looking.
It's not a dollar sign; it's a deal sign.
In fact, and I know we're tangent a little bit, but I talked to a guy from church that I was mentoring, and he's in his 20s, and he's like, "Man, I feel like every time I'm calling somebody, I'm just asking for help, or wanting something." Yeah. And I was like, "Man, I get it." I said, "So just start thinking about who that person is, what they do, what they love to do, and how can you help them before you call it. Like, don't just make it about but you have to, your heart has to be in the right spot to do that." Does that make sense? Like you can't just
knowing where they're coming from, knowing like what triggers them and signals them and where their buttons are at. And you're not, not from a manipulating standpoint, but just because I know that feeling. I mean, I've had it before. I'm always asking questions and I'm always trying to get help, or whereas I'm not really providing anything back. Mm-hmm. But that's what a mentor is. I mean, and people that accept that role are usually understanding, right? You of anybody I know, the most understanding when it comes to people asking you stuff. I go nuts. I'm just be honest with you. If people were asking me those questions all day, every day, I don't know that I could handle that. You, on the other hand, you love that and thrive in those situations.
Well, I think, and I see people on Facebook and social media, like, I'm not giving in my information without somebody paying for it. That just drives me a little bit crazy. Like, now, will I make somebody work for it before I get to where I'm pouring into somebody? Absolutely. Yep. I'm not, hey, call me next Tuesday at 10 a.m.
See if they do
it. Yeah. If they're hungry and they really want something, they're going to figure out how to put that on the calendar, remind them. Does that make sense?
It's important to them.
So it's important to them. You got to have, that if you're going to pour into somebody, they got to want it and need it. And so that's where I was going with that. So anyway.
Real quick for you in the show. Never quit versus throwing in the towel. I think you can kind of apply this last few minutes into your terms, my price, your terms. I mean, because if there's a difference of never quitting versus just throwing in the towel, right? I mean, quitting is one thing, and throwing in the towel, regrouping. I always like to say, let's punt, and football reference. Let's punt and start over again. But what does that mean to you, though? Never quit versus throwing in the towel.
To me, it's when you fail. John Maxwell had a good book, Failing Forward. I love that book. It was one of the first ones I read out of college.
I love that term. Always have.
Yeah, failing forward. Yeah. Like when you fail, you've paid the price. It's a sunk cost. Yeah. But I've talked to my kids about this all the time. Like, who chooses? What are the two reactions you can have in life?
Happy and sad.
Happy and sad.
Anger,
positive
and negative. Yeah,
that's
anger.
Only really two. Now, out of the positive and negative, there's a ton of emotion of what you were just describing. Happy, lucky, blessed. Negative, blaming everybody. Or I can't do this. So when something happens to you, you're gonna have a positive, negative experience.
Either way.
So whatever happens, you get stuck at the airport. I loved watch when I used to travel all the time, those guys that would treat it as a negative. The snowstorm, get on the microphone, and they just start yelling at that lady at the desk.
Yeah.
And they're just sit there. It's almost like a Seinfeld episode. They're sitting there typing their, I'm sorry, sir, and they just start just hammering them, and I'd come behind. I'd wait a few minutes. I'd come behind them. I was like, ma'am, I know y'all have had a terrible day.
Yeah.
This is the worst. I said, so if you can just figure out any way to get me home, I would just be so appreciative. You know what I mean? Like, and all of a sudden that keyboard be
You're
clicking.
playing the field, man.
But I just took it as like, I mean, those are people, they've had a bad day. It's not their fault that the snow is blah, blah, blah. And so, you how you act and how you react is gonna determine
I do that in restaurants.
Yeah. How's that?
You just see a customer giving someone a hard time, and then they come over to us, and I try to make a joke about it.
Yeah, lighten it up. They're having a bad.
And then, sure enough, you see the expression and the
you relieve them,
the emotions come. Oh my gosh, yes. What can I get for you? And then they immediately are trying to treat you well and recovering from that horrible scene. But
I don't know if you get this a lot, but I mean, one thing that I hope the listeners understand with a lot of us talking about this stuff, like Thomas Edison, I had that as an example, failed 1,000 times before he made the light bulb. Like some of the stuff we're talking about is it's like, well, why y'all talk? That has nothing to do with real estate. Oh, absolutely, yes, it does. Mm-hmm. Millionaire Real Estate Investor. I just gave that book to somebody Sunday. Just handed it to him. I said, "I remember you got this, but I want this back because it's like my real estate Bible that I love to reference." But a third of that book is about people's mindset and attitude.
Right.
And so if you don't get that figured out, you should not get in this business. Hey,
I appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, man.
Great topics today. We're going to post a show on this Facebook page as soon as we're done here. So thanks you guys for tuning in. We'll be back next Tuesday at 8 a.m. You're listening to the Memphis Real Estate Hour on AM 990 Memphis.
I swear I can't get